Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Human Element. Today I'm speaking with Kevin O'Connor, Director of Threat Research at Enable. Kevin, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, I'm really glad to be here today. I'm super excited about this, actually.
Cool, good to have you on. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your journey so far?
Yeah, I'm Kevin O'Connor. I've always been a geek, since childhood into science, computers, tech, all that. When I was in middle school, I was like trying to show off to kids and stuff like that, showing them it was like a Windows 98 hack sort of bypass thing. And when I was doing that, I actually bricked my language arts teacher's computer, and this is in New York City. So instead of getting me to trouble, in public school, they actually put me in this thing they called the Mouse Squad at the time. It's like making opportunities under student education. And pretty much what it allowed us to do is like get hands-on computer training, like how to run Active Directory systems and stuff like that, how to like run the school's network, run cables, pretty much like got us A+ certified and stuff at like a young age. And, so I've been running like help desk tier 1 since middle school, kind of did that up through college. While I was in college, I got picked up by the NSA to come work for them. Spent about a decade there. That was amazing. Great experience. And then I moved on to private industry, spent a bit of time at CrowdStrike. And then I came over to Adlumin, which was recently acquired by Enable. And we're a MDR services and platform company, completely cloud-based.
Awesome. Sounds like a fun program in middle school there. It's like, if we can't control you, we might as well put you to work.
Yeah, there's nothing like filling out tickets and FTPing up, the week's tickets to the central server on a Friday afternoon, when you're 12.
In seventh grade. That's awesome. So let's start with, why don't you tell us about a few of the key life events that shaped your leadership style?
I really think it was honestly working at the National Security Agency was probably the biggest sort of, shape of my leadership, sort of the way I handle it and perceive it. It was a very mission forward environment. So everything was for the mission. Everybody was there, not because they were being paid top dollar, but they were still top talent. So, they were there because they believed in the mission and what we were doing. So it was a really unique environment. And you really have to learn how to put yourself first as well, because a lot of times things like, when you're working towards something really important to you, it can kind of be all consuming. And, even especially if it's all consuming for others around you, sometimes you're the one who has to put your foot on the brakes and say like, take a step back, guys, there is something outside of this as well. You are fighting for something sort of thing. And then I think also just being around sort of that top talent, the people who were just so smart, like, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but, I'm pretty quick. But some of the guys I worked with, the guys and girls, they were just, next level, next tier. And that always just kind of drove me to make sure that I was never the smartest person in the room. That's the way you grow. If you're hiring to, sort of like confirm what you're thinking or sort of your mindset, you're never going to get anywhere. So I think just that combination of sort of like being mission driven and then also just working with some of the best and brightest was really sort of foundational in how I ended up approaching leadership. More of like an empower than sort of like a, top down approach, like take a bottom up approach. You want to enable your experts.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard it that way. I mean, I've heard, yeah, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I've never heard avoid being the smartest person in the room, but that's an interesting way to put it. Can you tell me about a mistake, preferably unclassified, that led to significant personal growth?
Lots of mistakes. So I think that's honestly, people say it and you don't believe it until you go through it. But like mistakes are the way that you learn, right? If you're not making mistakes, you're not taking chances, you're not pushing yourself. And it's important to, make mistakes that are recoverable. And, the biggest thing I've learned throughout that is that it's not necessarily when you make the mistake or how you, like what mistake you made, but it's sort of like how you own it. And I say like how you stick the landing. So like, the biggest mistake can always be recovered from. And I remember one time I was involved in an operation where some of it went bad and like, it didn't go according to plan. Right. And, there was high consequence because of that. And, I thought that was it for me. Right. I thought I was going to be a pariah. Like it was going to be the end of my career. But, the way that I took ownership of the mistake and the way that I followed up and sort of like recovered from that impact, right. Like lessened the impact and also kept like leadership aware of what was going on. Right. And so that they knew the risks that were happening as they were happening. Just really allowed it to be sort of like a no big thing, like a learning lesson for everybody, right? How do we prevent it in the future, right? What went wrong, what went right? And I think that was just a really good sort of experience. And that's something that like, you see throughout, like you'll see it sort of repeated throughout your career probably. So it's important to take those lessons when that happens. The other big thing that I learned is probably ask for help early and often. So I'm the type of person that like when I'm put in a new environment or I'm, given that fire hose of information to learn from, which like happens all the time in tech, right? I often will try to figure it out myself first, probably to my own detriment, where I'll spend 6 hours trying to figure out how something works. Whereas I could go ask for help and it'll take 15 minutes. So just making sure that, when help is available, you take advantage of it. Showing up is half the battle, they say. So
Is there any one individual who had a significant impact on your career?
yeah, I had a boss early on in my career, Nicole, we won't use her last name, but she was fantastic, man. She drove us so hard, and she was sort of a perfectionist, and she expected the same from her people, right? And because she was leading important mission and things like that, she taught me when somebody tells you no, your response should be, how do I get to a yes? At least in an operational environment, when it's something that you want or something that you need for your mission, you should always be asking ask them, what is the issue, right? Like, why is it a no? Like, how can we resolve that? Or how can we, a lot of times it's just an education problem, right? Like, you have to let the people know, like, why it's important or how it's important or what you're doing. And you can often change that no to a yes, and enable yourself. And there was another mentor I had, Sean. He was just fantastic as well. And like one of the biggest things that he always pushed is like that outside, right? Like you are like there is a life outside of work, right? No matter what you're doing, whatever your mission is, whether it's a startup or government or what law enforcement, there's always something outside of that, and you have to make sure that you keep that in focus, and that's kind of what you're working for at the end of the day. So
Nice. What's the most rewarding aspect of your job today?
being able to protect small and medium businesses, honestly, that's something that I'm super passionate about. When I actually, first started my career, I was able to see, like, while I was in the government, how, government can help defend private businesses, right? Like the commercial sector in the US. And what I was seeing, especially this is before I think even CISA, was founded within DHS, was that there was a huge gap and time delay between what, we were learning on the front lines and what was being distributed to organizations to help protect them. I mean, we have things like ISACs now, right? The information sharing and intelligence centers and stuff like that, analysis centers, and those are fantastic. But like, I don't see them impacting the small and medium businesses as much. And a lot of times today, that's where e-crime actors are shifting their focus to, because they realize that it's easier to get, $110,000 ransoms than one, $100,000 ransom or something like that from a larger company. And because small, medium businesses have today, I feel they have a similar surface area and exposure to larger enterprises because they're using so many third-party services and applications, right? Like small, medium businesses are using Azure and Entra and all that. They're using ChatGPT. They're using a ton of tools where their information is going and accesses are enabled for them. So, I think it's just a combination sort of what's going on in the environment that it's important to help like introduce cybersecurity, right? Like cybersecurity is becoming a baseline expectation for a lot of organizations, right? Like you don't expect to go to your dentist office and your dentist office to like leak your private information, right? Like you just don't expect that. And like, especially the way I see it in the education industry, if you've seen some of like the latest hacks that have been happening where like, there's details about, elementary school children and like assault against them and stuff like that's now out there in the public that's going to follow them around forever, right? Or their medical information. Like this is just terrible stuff that like really shouldn't be out there. And not to mention like, I mean, we see it with like the latest one was one of the Chinese actors, typhoon actors, just the breadth of access they had into US critical infrastructure across how many states, across how many sectors. I mean, it was like dams, it was shipping ports, it was airport, it was everything, right? And I think that was the first time that the government had come out and said that this was where they had actually seen and they believed it was like pre-positioning for potential future attack. And like seeing, Chinese threat actors in US networks isn't, unfamiliar or, it does happen. But, when they come out and say that this looks like pre-positioning, that's the next step, right? And that's where you really have to then be worried.
Definitely. What non-technical skill have you found most important in your management?
Organization, definitely organization. I mean, time management for sure, but just being able to, keep track of the tasks that are coming in, the ones that are, their priority, whether they've been assigned and, how they've been completed, things like that. Whether a lot of times you have to be very explicit in what you want back. If you just give somebody sort of like a broad range to answer back and you need like something specific, you're going to be disappointed. So be explicit. But yeah, definitely like management, sort of like keeping track of things in organization. Jira is going to become your best friend if that's used in your organization, I found, right? Any sort of ticketing system. I mean, like I said, I've been using them since middle school. I've used everything from Service Desk to Jira and stuff like that. And, things like that are fantastic ways to just track what's going on. In my college career, I took a project management course, which like at the time I thought was, oh, why am I taking this? This is not like, you're doing like Gantt charts and stuff like that. And like project planning, you're like, this is so boring. I'm here for the fun stuff. Show me how to hack sort of thing. But honestly, that was one of the most invaluable courses, when I started my career, being able to like plan out a project, like track it, the different phases of it, especially like pre-planning and things like that. Like know what you're getting into before you get into it. Because that's a lot of times where like, growing costs and delays and stuff come from, right? It's not fully understanding the scope and what the problem is before you sort of go into it. So yeah, definitely like that project management and tracking.
How do you approach building trust within your teams?
I do it through showing sort of like technical expertise. And like I said, I kind of like approach it from that bottom up sort of leadership. Like I let the experts drive me, right? Like they're the ones that have the most informed opinion on their like area of expertise, right? So like nobody can be an expert in everything, right? It's just not possible. You could be an inch wide, a mile deep, or something like that, right? Or a mile wide, inch deep, or something. I don't know. But yeah, either way, I think it's important to sort of like listen to your experts, right? And like I said, like you want to hire and make sure that your team is built on experts, right? That have their own areas of expertise. No man's an island to himself, sort of thing. I think that really helps, and that's sort of like how I drive that.
Has that approach evolved as you've grown experience and teams have gotten bigger?
Yeah, definitely. As your team size grows, and especially as you come into environments where maybe you're not building it, like I was lucky when I came into Adlumin, who was just acquired by Enable, like I was able to start their threat research team. So like I was able to pick all the hires and stuff like that. But eventually you're going to, inherit an organization of people, and you're going to have to learn how to work with them. You're going to have to learn how to build specialties within them, right? So that they can be more effective. And I think like you'll also find, right, like realistically, eventually budgets are going to come into play and things like that. You're not always going to be able to hire, the best Windows forensic expert. So you're going to need to be able to work with them to, build them up, right? Like, especially your job as a manager is to empower people's careers, right? Whether it's with you or their next stage beyond you, right? You want to be that person who like they remember as like helping their career, right? Like the two people I had mentioned, right? They were looking out for me, not necessarily themselves. And that made all the difference, right? And you want to be doing that for all your people, right? Like you owe them a responsibility, and you're doing a disservice if you're not helping them.
Yep. Tell me about your strategy for balancing technical expertise with new leadership skills.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think that's why, it is sort of like a pyramid, right? Where you see, less people sort of in leadership is also because like it requires that combination of being able to explain the technical to like non-technical audiences, which is something that's always such a challenge to find in like those truly technical experts. So it's really that communication piece that can differentiate somebody having a successful career in management or not. And that especially like extends to like, written word as well. Like, everything from emails, but especially like, papers and things like that, right? It's really hard to find people who can express themselves well, in written format. And I think developing those skills is really going to help you, whether it's like, taking a course at a local community college or, buying a workshop book and like working through it, right? Like there are tools out there to help you with this, especially now that we have like chat GPT and stuff like that, right? Like write something and ask it to critique it and how could I do it better, right? Tell it like, this is my end goal. This is what I want the reader to take away from it, and make sure that what you've written is sort of empowering that.
How do you define success for your team?
Success for my team is first off like meeting the deliverables, right? What your mission is, meeting your goals. So like make sure that you have things like KPIs, right? So you can track your progress so that you know what success looks like. Before you take on any project or any mission or operation, you always want to know what is your success condition in this case, right? Like what are the criteria? Because you're not necessarily going to meet all of them, but you may meet some of them. So I think that's really important when you're sort of like building that out, but also them being happy and growing, right? Like I said, nobody wants to work with a bunch of employees who hate them and are unhappy with their jobs, and nobody wants to be that employee, right? So you just want to make sure that, you're not asking too much of your people. I think there's a tendency in the tech world for that to happen. And people often assume like, oh, well, I know it and it's easy for me. It takes me 5 minutes. Well, when you're assigning it to a junior engineer, it's not going to take them 5 minutes. It might take them days, right? Like,
Took you a few years to learn how to do it in 5 minutes. Yeah.
yep. I mean, nobody's going to be like, I always say, like, whenever somebody starts a job, expect at least like a 6-month ramp up just for them to understand the organization and what's going on, right? So, larger projects, larger code bases, larger operations, it's going to take even longer.
Absolutely. Is there any daily routine that you've found especially helpful?
Yeah. First thing I do when I wake up, when I'm having my coffee in the morning, is I read the news, right? Like I have a lot of like different news aggregators. I'm always looking for a better solution. But things like InnoReader, whatever RSS feeds you have aggregated. Also things like Google News and Apple News are pretty good at like targeting news towards you as well. And just spend time. I often find myself still dabbling with like the intelligence aspect of sort of cybersecurity a lot too. So like being aware of like geopolitical affairs, what's going on. That's also important. So it's just like, that's the number one thing you can do, right? Like you're always going to be asked like what's going on, or, your opinion on this topic, or, you have to know what's going on so you can better defend networks, right? So I think that's like the number one thing. Spend the hour every day in the morning. It can be relaxing.
Yeah, unless the news is stressful on its own.
That is true.
So if you find yourself feeling overwhelmed, unfocused, how do you get back on track?
I use music actually, which is funny because never found myself like growing up to be like that guy that was into music or listened to it a lot. But I found like over my career, honestly, like going for a walk and just blasting the tunes can really just like help reset you. Take a beat, take a minute away from it, go take a shower. We've all woken up at midnight with like that great idea. So like sometimes you do have to step away. And I think that's the best way. Like, don't undersell the amount of time it's going to take you to recharge as well, right? Like if you've just kicked off like a year-long sprint on something, right? And like you worked yourself to the bone over the last year, like don't expect you're going to recover in 2 days over a weekend, right? Like it's going to take more than that. So just, make sure you're not burning yourself out. That's a huge issue in this industry, especially among leadership. And you want to make sure that, you don't get to the point where you have to step away for your own sake.
Let's hope so. You talked a little bit about your news habit in the morning. Any other tools you use to keep track of emerging threats?
Having a good like network, right? Like over a career, you'll build up people with those specialties, like I said. And like, I know like I talked to my one friend, Jim, specifically about like Windows forensics, right? Like that's like when we text, like it's usually revolving, sharing news around that or something like that. We're like, oh, did you see this is crazy. This way you always have like people to reach out to when you need that expert opinion. And especially as you're dealing with like larger and larger and more complex issues, you're going to need like, even if you're working for one business, you might need like assistance from a competitor, right? Or you might need them to validate something you're seeing, right? So having those networks really helps. And also engaging with a lot of I'm not a Discord guy, but there's a ton of Discord channels that I've found really helpful that I'm starting to get into and watching more. It's a great place where people share intelligence and news. Yeah, there's a lot of garbage and chit chat, but like if you find the right channels, it's in there. And then historically, I would have said Twitter was huge too, especially in the security community. Less so these days. I know there's more like Mastodon and stuff. I haven't really hit that too hard yet, but hopefully in the future, I have hopes for that.
So is there one thing you do as a leader that you would like to see more leaders doing?
Listening to their people. I always say, I mean, that's something I guess is kind of been a common theme throughout our conversation. But like, again, like listening to your people when people are telling you they're unhappy, listen to them. And like when people demonstrate their value, like talk them up, right? Like make sure that you're listening to like what their success has been, and like you're sort of like talking that up through your chain, right? Like especially if you are sort of towards the lower end of the management chain or something, right? Like there's a lot of people above you and they won't know what's going on unless you tell them. So even if it's a success that doesn't necessarily directly impact them, like, day to day, like, if you're walking by the CEO or something like that, right? Like mention, oh yeah, John on my team did a great job, right? Like his whole team, great job on that deliverable, like really helped us with this, because those are the kind of things that they're going to remember that are going to later empower those people in their career, right? And that's kind of like what you're here for. You're leading, you're not commanding.
So as managers, we all have kind of day-to-day tasks we have to deal with in addition to what our teams are trying to accomplish. How do you split that out? How do you keep track and keep a balance?
Personally, poorly. Poorly. Give a lot of trust to my folks to manage themselves, sometimes to my own detriment. So like letting them manage their own time, letting them manage their own like deliverables within a project, within the project scope, and letting them sort of like figure out what needs to be done along the way. And sometimes people need a little bit more handholding. So I think that's probably one area that like is definitely important that I'm personally always working at, more. Because you want to build like a responsible crew, right? Like you want to make sure that you can trust your people. But sometimes it's the challenge of finding what's that left and right, And I think that's always, people, you also have to not test them, but like give them the opportunity to fail, right? Give them an opportunity to prove you wrong. And just because somebody's performed one way in the past doesn't mean they'll always perform that way, whether for, the positive or the negative, right? Like they could always be, everybody has off weeks and things like that, and always be patient with like people you're working with. Everybody has their superstar period. Everybody's got their crash period, things like that. Like make sure that you're watching them and that, you're not asking too much sort of thing.
How do you know when you've got an effective team culture, and how do you build it?
When you've got an effective team culture, when you want to go grab drinks with your team. You know what I mean? Like, even if you're all remote, like these days, a lot of this is remote. I work remote personally a lot of the time. But even knowing that, yeah, if I was there, I'd go grab a drink with Kyle, right? Or we could all get together and have a good time. I think that's the the sign of a great culture. And it doesn't have to be a drink. I'll go paintballing with them or something. You don't want to be dreading seeing somebody in the office or, having to talk to somebody. Not to say that there's always coworkers who, aren't social or something like that. There's always different personalities, but when everybody, sort of sees themselves as a team working towards the objective and everybody feels like everybody's carrying their weight, you don't want there to be somebody on the team who, feels like a drag or something like that, right? Because that just leads to sort of animosity and problems within the team. And then, that person ends up drowning and stuff like that. So, you want to make sure that everybody's carrying their weight and that everybody, gets along. Personalities, man. Personalities is can make all the difference in the end, honestly. Between like even success and not, right? Like if you're gonna pull long hours or something, trying to pull something off, like you want to be doing with somebody, who's your buddy. So
Want it to be fun. What's your approach to screening for good personality and new team members?
I try, like, when I do interviews, like, I have my list of questions and stuff, like points that I want to make sure I ask, but I try to keep it more conversational. I ask them how their day's going, right? Like, how do they respond, things like that. Like, I ask them about a time they had a problem with, a team member. Those are kind of like the default questions that people think a lot during interviews, but they can bring a lot of value, right? Like knowing how somebody has responded to something in the past tells you like what they're capable of and how they act. So, really use those opportunities to, again, like listen to what they're telling you. When somebody tells you there's a certain way, believe them.
What's your approach to difficult decisions?
Flip a coin, always flip a coin. No, I fall back. So, like, my actual degree from college, one of them was in security and risk analysis. And in that, they taught us a lot of like analytical techniques to go through. So, everything from like making a pros and cons list, right, to assigning point values to certain categories and like, figuring out like try to quantitatively assign scores to even qualitative values, which I hate to say because like a lot of times people will like use qualitative data to draw like quantitative analysis. You know what I mean? To like speak with like 100% certainty that this is the case when like the data they're working from isn't even like, it's not even expressed that way. It's expressed in things like very likely. Like that's not 100%. But like when you're trying to actually like figure something out and weigh through a decision in your mind or some sort of complex thing, like assigning that value, right? Like whether it's like you're trying to decide between five things, right? Like give everything a score between 1 and 5, and then add up at the end between those categories, and then like believe it, like you know what I mean, like and even if not, like if the answer isn't what you were hoping, like that tells you something itself, right? Like they always say, like when you flip a coin, like that's when you know what you really want. So like when you're deciding between Burger King and McDonald's, like the second the coin goes in the air and you're hoping for heads McDonald's, like you want the McDonald's. So like even just going through that exercise can tell you what you really want. And that applies in life and like work and decisions and leadership. And then at least you can ask yourself, why is that what I want? Like and maybe that is the better choice, but like at least then you're aware. Trick yourself.
There you go. What advice do you most often give other people in the field?
Keep current. That's the biggest thing. I like if you wanna be good in this field, like you have to keep current. Technology is always changing. Like, yeah, there's gonna be a job, programming COBOL forever. But, especially when you're talking about security, like the technologies that businesses are adapting, that people are adapting in their homes, like it feels like it's changing faster than ever personally. Like, I mean, I can't believe like I just took a look back the other day and I couldn't believe like how much it had advanced. Just like the smart lights I have in my basement have advanced where like I just walk in and they turn on now. Like that was, or like I can use my iPhone from my MacBook. Like this is the level of integration that we haven't had in the past. So like being able to keep up with the technologies and protocols that empower that are going to be important for your career. So like understand, how things like Bonjour work and stuff. Not that Bonjour is new, but just stuff like that, right? Like these things are going to change, right? Like what are we on, like HTTP 2.0 now or something like that, right? So like and TLS is on version 2 or 3.
3.1, I think. Yeah.
3.1. There we go. Yeah. 2 is old now. Jeez. I remember 1.1 or whatever it was. Yeah. So like I mean things like that are always changing. So that's going to be super important.
How do you strike that balance between doing the work you've got to do and keeping up with it?
I mean, I think that's where it becomes like do what you love and it's not you'll never work a day in your life, which is unrealistic. Like even if you do love it, like there's always going to be the slog part, right? Or the part where you're like, I wish I could just go to bed or, do whatever I want. But I mean, when it's something that you're passionate about and you find your passion, like you want to read the news. Like even if I wasn't working like that day, I'll still be reading the news about, what's going on that day. Like I still on Saturday do these things, right? Like they're things I'm interested in and would be looking at either way.
What's your approach to mentoring the next generation of security professionals?
build the foundations. So I teach them, like, I make sure that they know like the foundations of networking. Like some of the stuff is taken for granted. I feel like a lot of things that used to be more complicated back in the day that would require things like, command line access or something like that to do, like, can now be done through a GUI interface, which, like, not saying that, I mean, like, if it's better for you, then do it, right? Like, whatever works. But like a lot of times I find myself having to teach some like the more remedial basics, like how do you quit out of Vim, right? Like, I don't know if we've probably all been there, but like you're stuck.
There is no escape.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like just teaching them that, or that, hey, you could actually use Nano. It's a lot quicker. So just like those tips and tricks that you teach, like, that you take for granted, like how to show them your efficiencies as well, right? Like what's your IDE environment look like? Compare and like, compare and contrast. So like maybe you can learn something from them, but like maybe they can learn something from you. I've actually found emojis are great. Emojis in your terminal have been actually fantastic at drawing my eyes to important things during scripting. So like that's something like I had never started using until I started working with this one guy who like I swear like texts me an emoji, like just pure emoji sentences. I'm like, okay. So like I started throwing those in some of the scripts and it's like, oh, it is nice when there's like an X, right? A visual X, red X, and or a green check mark. I'm like, well, okay.
The big red X and the green check mark for as you go through the list of tests. Yeah.
Yeah, or even when you're making a Confluence page, right? Like it makes a difference. It makes it easier. We're all trying to learn and see a lot and ingest information. So making sure that you can present it in a way that's easy to see is important.
Absolutely. Can you recommend any resources, books, podcasts, etc., that helped you get to where you are today?
I really like Security Now that was running off. I don't know what the production's called. It's still Twit. It's like This Week in Tech was the original show, but they have, I think Steve Gibson's on there and Leo Laporte was on there for a while too. I'm not sure if he still hosts it, but that was a fantastic one. I haven't listened to it in a little while, but I was a avid weekly listener for a long time. Krebs on Security, of course, like out in the industry, everybody read his stuff just because it's good long form content a lot of the times. And then I say like find your cybersecurity experts on Twitter and follow them. That would be my traditional news because like that's a lot of times where you'll hear a first word about things coming out, or you'll see in discussions between people like, hey, I just saw this like new website, or I just saw this new technique, and like that's where it'll explode from. Also, get familiar with GitHub. There's tons of good repositories out there with everything from, lists of resources for specific topics to like people even use it as a sort of like a storage database appropriately. But so like, there's data out there that you could use in your organization and stuff, especially in defense out there as well.
You mentioned the basics, going back to first principles, things like networking. I've noticed a trend recently where a lot of people saying, you don't really need to know networking to get into security. How does that strike you?
I mean, honestly, that's one of the reasons why, like, I had left CrowdStrike because, like, when I was there, they were very EDR focused or like very endpoint focused, and I always found that's the case. Like, even when I was at the agency and stuff, it was very like people were very endpoint focused, but like a lot of what goes on is not on the endpoint, or things that are happening, especially these days, right? Like anything you're doing online is going beyond the endpoint, so it's not just the security of that one device; it's the security of the entire comms link, right? Or, I mean, we've seen cases where China's hijacked BGP using BGP routing and stuff, like hijack traffic to go into their country and stuff like that, so it could be observed. So like I think knowing that those types of things are possible and how that works, right, and how that would only affect unencrypted traffic, things like that, like those are important, right? You can't understand like what the actual attack surface is or what the vulnerability is like unless you understand the full sort of end to end, right? Like those exploits are being thrown, across a network link, right? So like there's a chance to observe, there's a chance to react. I mean, there's IDSs, IPSs, right? There's a whole host of things that are just like strictly network based. And, it goes beyond that. Like now it's not just network, right? It's cloud, which is kind of its own thing. It's like identity. Now we kind of consider its own thing as well, which is kind of like the feature we're pushing. There's third party integrations. Everybody's got their own MSP or MSSP. Even giant enterprises might have 10 of them. I mean, look at how, I think, was it Caesars that was targeted that way? It was through one of their MSPs and stuff like that. So like, yeah, it's just out there, right?
What was the best management advice you've ever received?
Go home. I had this one Leonard Morgan, and she would just tell me like, go home, like stop, because there's always going to be work at the end of the day. Like you could always keep going, especially when you're in management, right? Like a lot of times it's your job to execute on like a shared vision or something like that, right? So there's always a way it can be tuned, or there's always more that can be done, or even if you're in development or something like that, there's always something else or another feature, another commit, another news article to read. So like when that hour is done at the end of the day, like or in the morning, like I put it down, and there's always more articles to read, right? Like my reader always has like another 5,000 articles, but like you have to know when to stop because there's other things that need to be done. So like knowing when to put it down, maybe even not go home for the day, but like move on to the next task, right? Like done is better than perfect. 95% of the time. Which I said I hated what people do earlier, but I'll say something like that.
Worth hedging that one. So on your way up the ladder of leadership, what was the hardest transition you faced?
Probably the first one where I went from like being one of the crew, like one of the workers, to like being one of like the leaders. And again, like having to manage people who are your friends, or like who, you would previously go grab drinks with, right? Like it's a different relationship, there are different boundaries and stuff like that. So I think learning that, it was not necessarily difficult, but like it was definitely like, it's the biggest change you'll experience probably, where you're going from, you know, being the person producing the work to primarily like expecting others to produce the work, which is definitely a change, right? You don't want to find yourself in a leadership position where you're still like an individual contributor as well.
Are you observing any trends developing in the space that will require that we adjust how we lead our teams?
Yeah, AI, right? So like for the remote, I don't know if this is really a trend at this point anymore, but like the remote workforce, I know like some of it's been trending back, but like honestly, like security and tech has always been relatively remote forward. I think like knowing how to work with remote teams, knowing how to, I mean, like increasing globalization, knowing how to work across time zones and stuff like that, right? Like across countries has been important. And then of course AI. I mean, AI is one of the biggest ones everybody will tell you, right? Like I found immense value even just from like some of those like AI meeting summarizations and stuff like that, right? Like, just being able to not have to sit there and take meeting notes or something like that, and being able to, reference the complete transcript or something like that has been super helpful. It can help you keep track of tasks. It can do research faster than you can, and at least produce like, a citation, right? Like nowadays, we're not dealing with dumb sort of like regular LLMs, right? Like these things are like backed by web searches and like references and stuff. So like it's all verifiable if you need. So just knowing where to appropriately use it can be a big empower.
How does that change your approach to leadership?
I think for me, it really has allowed me to take off some of the simpler tasks from folks. So in the past, where I would have to ask somebody like summarize a bunch of content for me or something like that, or like go look at this and like tell me, what's the bottom line up front, or even like, can you pull the indicators of compromise from this article? Like, that's something that AI has proven it can do. There's companies out there that do it, as their job as well. Like, I think that's been a huge one. That's been a huge like load off of like people that, I work with sort of play.
Does that change your approach to training at all?
Honestly, no, I don't think so. It's changed my approach to training in that I think like primarily AI can, if nothing else, I guess, could be used for education, right? Like it can be used to do like, how does this work, right? Like, and then you can ask it to explain it to you in concepts that you can understand. Whereas before, you're looking for a Stack Overflow post, and then like, what's written is what's written, right? And like, first off, you comment, good luck not getting flamed. But then like, whether somebody responds and it's been 2 years or something like that, right? So like, just because you don't understand the post, right? It's like, then you're kind of stuck, right? Looking for alternate resources if there are any. Whereas with like some of these LLMs, like, it can ingest that data. You can copy and paste the contents of the forum post and ask for, more explanation, stuff like that. So I think it's a great tool for helping sort of like people get educated and people that work for me get educated. So I do that. I think that's primarily how sort of AI is played into sort of like the education role, and like how I sort of like assign out tasking and stuff day to day. But I think they still need to know, right? So like in that IOC example, like they still need to know like how to read an article and pull out like, the IPv4s from it and stuff. Like that's going to always need to be something they need to do, because they have to be able to validate what the AI is saying too, right?
Absolutely. Do you ever worry that over time skills will degrade because we're relying so heavily?
Yes, absolutely. All the time. I worry about that. I mean, even with like what I've heard for like, so my sister's a teacher. So she's teaching like, middle school now. But like, just like the way kids are interacting with technology these days, right? Like, they don't like, a lot of times they're not familiar even with like a Windows desktop. So like asking them to like navigate like the hierarchy of like, my computer, C, program files, like they don't, what are you talking about? Like, I just save everything on the iPhone to the iCloud drive, and then I just search.
It's all in iCloud and it's all an app.
Yeah, I just search for what I want. Yeah, like, what are you talking about? And I think we've seen that transition, and, like, I'm starting to see people who are more and more like that enter the workforce. Less so in technology, it seems, but, like, in other areas more, where, like, you do have to do some of that, like, "Here's how Excel works." Whereas, like, before, like, you kind of it's assumed you know how Excel works. I think the AI could introduce some issues like that, right? Like, I think, like, especially with, like, grammar, writing, things like that, like, just not practice skills. If you don't practice it, you lose it, first off. That's the biggest thing. Like, every year, I actually go through some of the notes I took on, like, calculus, chemistry, physics, so like I can remember these things, right? Because like if you don't review like your basic trigonometry, you're not going to remember it, right?
So you mentioned earlier a bunch of your team is remote. What are your key tips and tricks in terms of functioning as a team in a remote environment?
Yeah, making sure that there's at least a like core set of hours where everybody's working, especially if you can manage it across whatever time zones. Like in the US, we're lucky because you're really only dealing with like, the few and it's manageable. But when you're doing global, it's a little more tricky. In that case, if you're managing a global team, make sure you set aside time as leadership to talk to those individuals still. Maybe that means you working a night shift once a week or once every other week or something, but make sure you're spending that time to, you know, talk to and offer equal resources to all of your employees. I've worked in lots of places where we've done night shifts and stuff like that, and like you don't want night shift to be forgotten, right? Like when you're in person, you don't want them to be the people who aren't getting the pizza in the break room and stuff. So I think that's important, especially remotely. People forget that, right? Because especially with remote, it ends up being a lot of 24/7. It feels like, but you have to carve out that time.
So when you're hiring for your team, we talked a little bit about hiring and a little bit about screening. Are there any like really super critical qualities you're looking for?
For me, I'm lucky enough that like I've been in a position where like I can choose, I could be pickier about who I hire, but I'm always looking for people who care and who are like, this is their passion, right? I focus in cybersecurity and stuff. So like, it is a specialty of a specialty, right? Like a lot of times, like cybersecurity isn't sort of an intro job to begin with outside of like maybe SOC tier one type stuff. A lot of times you already have to have a specialty or be an IT expert to sort of understand what's going on. So like I think really making sure that they care about the space because again, like then they're going to spend the time to like read the articles every day to understand what's going on, what's the latest and greatest, bring you the best opinions and be the smartest at their subject. So yeah, that's I always hire people who are passionate about it. And you can tell like if you're passionate about it and you talk to somebody else who's like, you could tell like recognizes or real recognizes real.
Absolutely. Eventually, the deep fakes will catch up, but we should be all right for a while. All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for today. As we wrap it up here, if people want to follow along with your work, where should they go?
You can always go to kevinbytes.com, bytes, BYTES. That's my website, or follow me on LinkedIn. I post content there as well. Yeah, hope to hear from you.
Awesome. Thanks for the great conversation.